All right, this section is about frequency distributions. Now, when I say frequency distribution, I also mean a frequency table, because a distribution is a way of showing the shape of the data, and a frequency distribution or a frequency table will help us to show the shape of the data eventually. Calling it a frequency distribution versus a frequency table helps us to tie this into probability theory later on, because really a frequency table is the same thing as a frequency distribution when we put it in terms of probabilities. Now, Triola likes to talk about his relative frequency distributions, and that again, the reason is because in probability we really do deal with relative frequency distributions. That is going to be a closer link than just talking about a frequency table. But I believe that if you can make a frequency table, you can make a relative frequency table, and there's no need to harp on the relative frequency portion of it at this point in time. I want to keep it simple. So you'll see me make frequency tables. I'll show you how to make a relative frequency table, but I'm not going to harp on them, as you will see many books do. And I understand their reasoning behind that, but I let the books guide you along into those. And then the other thing that we will talk about in this section is a cumulative frequency distribution. And again, when it comes time, I'll explain those as well. Cumulative frequency distributions, although they have their place, they're not as important as just learning how to create a frequency distribution. That is a skill that we need. And then from there, we can follow along with all the other types. So the first thing we're going to talk about is just some vocabulary. And once we've got the vocabulary under our belts, then we're going to use an example in order to exhibit all of this vocabulary. So let's start with vocabulary. The first thing I want to talk about are classes. Now, what you need to understand here is what we're going to do is take our data, and we are talking about numeric data here, by the way, because a frequency distribution for categorical data is kind of already done. So we're really talking about doing this for quantitative data, not the qualitative type. So with quantitative data, we're going to need to break our data, all this string of numbers, we're going to break it into groups or categories. And a class is just that, it's a category. So the classes are the divisions of the data. Now, in dividing the data, we want to do it into equal groups. And so we're going to call this divisions of the data. And another way you can think of this, and we don't call it this because then it's confusing with the types of data, of course, is categories, right? So it's division of the data into equal groups. Now the next thing that we want to talk about is a class width. Now a class width is, again, remember we're talking about quantitative data here, okay? The class width is how wide from the lowest possible to the highest possible number within one of these groupings, how wide is that? So low to high in class let's see, that's not really how I want to describe this. Nope, that's not my eraser. Here. So we want it to be to low or high to high or mid to mid or bound to bound width. And that's really what the class width is talking about. So it does talk about the classes themselves and how wide they are, but it's also talking about a lot of different things. So the class width is a little hard to explain verbally. It's much easier to explain the class width once we start seeing how this table is going to come together, and I will really highlight it on the low to low, high to high, mid to mid, bound to bound once we get to that point. So if you just be patient with me there. you'll see this come through in many, many ways once we actually see the table. So let me just leave that as the description. Now the next thing here that we have is the lower class limit. So this is the lowest value possible in a class. So we have the lowest number included within a class. That's what we would call it. Now, obviously, if that lower class limit is the lowest value possible, then you must be able to say, oh, then an upper class limit must be the highest value possible in a class. And if you said that to yourself before I ever said it, you were right. So this is the highest value. And I'm just going to abbreviate this, possible, so P-O-S-S, just POS, in a class. And so that would be our upper class limit. Now our class boundaries, the class boundaries are like gutters. So I'm going to describe this as being like a gutter. And this is the middle point between a lower limit and an upper limit. So an upper limit and the next successive lower limit. That's the middle between these. So a middle between and this is going to take a little bit more description, so I'll put it over here. And I'm going to use the word successive, meaning one to the next, right? So from one successive, upper, and its limit, and it's then to the next lower limit. And in these boundaries can't ever be an actual data point. So let's put that in as well. So can't be a data point. And we'll discuss that more when it comes time. And I'm going to use PT with a period after it to say point. And I'm going to highlight that as well. So we're going to go down here and I'm actually going to highlight this in blue. Real light blue there. It can't be a data point. All right, now the next thing that we're going to describe is what is a class midpoint or a class mark. So a class midpoint or a class mark is exactly what it says. It's a midpoint, so the midpoint of a class. And another word that we can use is the mark. So if you ever hear that, that's what it is. So this is midpoint of a class, so it's the exact middle of the class. And these as well, like the class boundaries, may be an actual number that couldn't be a data point. It doesn't matter. Now the last definition that we want is what is ordered or ranked data. So ordered or ranked data just means putting the data in order from low to high. So ordering or ranking data means putting it in low to high order. And those are all the things that we're going to do now with the following data set. So our data set you see here in front of you, and in the next video I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to talk about this data set, and we're going to revisit all of these definitions that we've just come across in learning how to put all of them to use to make a frequency table / distribution.